Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, thank you, gentlemen. Some of the leadership candidates for this Conservative leadership election are using the term managed no deal. Mr. Barnier has said, if the UK were to leave the EU without a deal, let me be very, very clear. We would not discuss anything with the UK until there is an agreement for Ireland, for Northern Ireland, as well as for citizens' rights and the financial settlement. So there seems to be a disparity between what the leadership candidates are saying, which is that we would leave with no deal and then start doing side deals and somehow circumnavigating the withdrawal agreement by just doing these side deals. That seems to conflict quite clearly with what Mr. Barnier's position is. Based on your contacts in Brussels, and I'm sure you're talking as well to your counterparts across the European Union, can you give an assessment of the phrase managed no deal and what validity you think it has as a negotiating position, also in light of Mr. Barnier's comments? Anybody really if would wish to comment on that?
If I may, I think from an auto perspective, the concept of a managed no deal doesn't really make sense. As I set out earlier, we are highly integrated as a sector. We have supply chains that crisscross the continent. So for anything to be managed, it has to be managed not unilaterally by the UK or unilaterally by the EU, but there has to be some form of agreement between the two sides as to how this will be managed, how we continue to move things across the border, what will be the basis of contractual arrangements, etc., etc. So the two things seem contradictory. No deal suggests nothing has been agreed and the two sides are operating separately. But to manage something, when you have an integrated sector like ours, it needs the two sides of the equation to be operating cooperatively and reaching some form of agreement. So it doesn't quite seem to make sense.
Anybody else care to comment on that? I'm sort of particularly looking at this point about there will be no negotiations about anything in the event of a no-deal exit because the outstanding issues in the withdrawal agreement, the divorce items, if you like, are still outstanding. So until such time as those issues have been resolved, there will be no side deals, no negotiations, no further discussion. Is that your assessment, Mr. Rycroft?
I cannot at the moment see why it would be in the EU's interest to do things that would mitigate the impact of no deal for us. So if you look at some of the issues that we talked about earlier, whether it's health marks for products of animal origin, whether it's heat-treated pallets, fortification of flour, these are all things that we would want a kind of side deal on in that event. These are things that would mitigate some particular impacts, and none of them have really been resolved. So discussions have taken place, there's a kind of opening positions have been set out, but I don't get any sense that the EU is in a rush to resolve those and reassure us that those can all be done in the event of no deal.
Thank you very much. A related question to that is a lot of the commentary coming out of Brussels is that the EU is not worried about a no-deal scenario because their view is that the British economy would not be able to withstand the shock and that within a matter of months the British government would be forced to put the withdrawal agreement through Parliament and to come to Brussels on the basis of those terms. And that is affecting the mindset in Brussels because, in essence, they don't think that a no deal... There would, of course, be some damage to the EU, but far, far less damage to the EU than there would be to us. And therefore, a no deal is a price worth paying in terms of getting the withdrawal agreement over the line, perhaps some months later, although, of course, it would be a somewhat unusual situation because we would actually be re-entering the EU on that basis. So that raises a number of quite challenging legal questions about how that would work in practice. Have you, in your scenario planning, thought through that eventuality, that we crash out with no deal on the 31st of October, but are then forced to come back and negotiate terms on the basis of the withdrawal agreement a few months later?
Needs to be borne in mind that the new Commission will not have taken up their seats until several weeks after the crash-out date at the end of October. Mr. Barnier's team has also been disbanded. His chief negotiators have been way on his move to a new job. So it appears from their end they considered the negotiations to be finished, and it would look like there will be nobody at the end of the phone to pick up a call from the UK if we were to decide to phone them immediately after a no-deal Brexit if we crashed out at the end of October. The politics of this would be very difficult to predict, so I'm not entirely convinced by the assumption that we will come back straight away, simply because it would depend on the nature of the disruption and how significant it is from day one. But it's a very, very difficult scenario to try and predict, and I think it's one that we would be very keen to avoid for those reasons.
I think there are so many potential scenarios we've been wrestling with over the last couple of years. As the NFU, we have tried to avoid getting involved in these sort of political considerations. What we've done is set out what is a workable Brexit for us, and as I made a distinction earlier, it's the concerns I have raised here today are concerns with a no-deal crash-out Brexit. We have laid out some clear principles which we feel is a way we can move forward with Brexit in a way that works. And they involve things like maintaining free and frictionless trade as possible with the EU, developing our future agricultural policy that supports UK farmers, etc. Those remain the way we are dealing with this. I would be very concerned. So no deal is out of the question for us. I would be very concerned with a scenario which was predicated on the fact that that might at some point lead to returning to the EU or softening the blow, because it may well not. What we are very concerned about is simply no deal and finding a to avoid that outcome.
Final question is just around the whole sort of ecosystem that is the customs union and the single market working in a very integrated way. But it's often said that if you look at border checks, 80% of the checking is actually single market related rather than customs union related. Do you see a customs union only type deal in terms of looking to the future relationship as being viable, or do you believe that single market membership or very close participation in the single market would also be a precondition for you being able to continue on the basis of the business models that you would like to see going forward?
I mean, for us, a customs union without a single market would be a very difficult situation and very far from where we want it to be.
Thank you. Any other
customs
comments?
union is necessary but not sufficient. We would require regulatory alignment, whether that means membership of the single market, and equally the ability to trade in services. So labour mobility would be an important element for us too.
Same applies to automotive. We need both for frictionless trade.
I think certainly in the short to medium term, whether you call it a customs union single market or you refer more to customs arrangements and regulatory alignment, are pretty critical to maintaining that free and frictionless trade. I think there are question marks in the much longer term how long that is politically viable, particularly if we give up our voice and our influence in shaping those rules. And I think that's where the problems arise. But that, I would hope, being optimistic, would be something that could be adjusted and taken forward over the longer term, so that we can come to a bespoke arrangement, essentially, where we maintain and retain a degree of governance and control over the rules that we are, as farmers, certainly required to adhere to.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.